Last speaker of this session, please give a great welcome to founder of the Stop the War Coalition, convener of Stop the War Coalition, brilliant activist, Lindsey.
Thanks, Jeremy, and I wanted to go back to a little bit of what Diane Abbott said when she spoke first thing this morning, because she talked about the vote in Parliament in August, the vote which I don't think most of us expected, a vote where the British Parliament for the first time, according to some records for 200 years, voted against its government in going to war. And as she said, that the MPs were brought back at great expense, because this was going to be a war that was absolutely necessary, was absolutely imminent, and was going to happen that very weekend, the last weekend in August. As we watched the vote, I think many of us, including I think some of the MPs, were surprised indeed that the vote did go against David Cameron, and that then he had to say, we get it, and we are pulling out of any intervention in Syria. But of course the consequences weren't just for Britain, and I think it was very important in Britain that we have spent 12 years now campaigning against a series of wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and now in Syria. I think it was very important that we built up anti-war opinion, and I don't think that would have happened we have no choice but to do this. Now, isn't it incredible when they have surveillance on absolutely everybody, as Jeremy has explained, that they can't allow these secrets? They complained about the Spanish government looking at some of their internal papers, the British government the other day, but they're looking at everybody's internal affairs, they're looking at everybody's emails, they're looking at everybody's communications all of the time. And therefore the Chilcot is still a major question for us. It seems to me it's one where we have to still try to hold Tony Blair to account, and that next year we have to be prepared to campaign over this if there is any hint that there will be yet another whitewash report coming out, as Peter has said already, at a cost of £9 million to the British taxpayer. That is one thing we have to do. We also have to ensure that we get every single last troop and every single last base out of Afghanistan. That there is absolutely no justification for being in that country. And it is up to the Afghans and nobody else what happens in those countries. It's absolutely the case with Iraq, it's absolutely the case with Libya, and it's absolutely the case with Syria. It's up to the Syrian people what happens in Syria, not up to all the powers which are at present intervening. And the truth of the matter is, when you look at what is going on in the Middle East, the aim of overt intervention has suffered a setback, but Syria also tells us the future, that you have the major powers intervening in the country, and that is something that they have absolutely no intention of giving up. And when you look at what is happening, there is already intervention in Africa, there's intervention from Somalia to Mali, right across parts of North and East Africa. You're talking about a situation where now there is a very dangerous standoff happening in the Far East, that the pivot to the Pacific, that Obama moving in this direction. What are we now finding? That there is rivalry, economic and military rivalry between China and the United States, and now there is a conflict between Japan and the US on the one hand and China over their airspace, which can turn into a very, very nasty conflict indeed. And when you look at all of these things, it seems to me that war is very much still on the agenda, and far from it being that, as it was a few years ago, confined very much to the Middle East, this is something which is spreading into much greater areas of the world. And therefore we have the threat of conflicts between the big powers. And we also have two other things that it's worth just mentioning. We have in this country and in most of Europe and around the world the growth of Islamophobia, the attacks on Muslims, the way in which Muslims are identified as terrorists and therefore are identified as extremists and therefore are persecuted, both in terms of racism but also in terms of attacks on their civil liberties. And we also have an infringement of civil liberties, where now people are finding it harder to demonstrate, where they're finding it harder to operate in colleges, to do all of those things. These are all issues which are of major concern for us, and we have to be able to campaign against them. And I just want to conclude by saying this, that next year is the anniversary of the First World War. This was a war which started supposedly almost by accident, that you had the rivalry between the big imperial powers, which eventually played itself out on the battlefields of Europe and actually of the Middle East as well. This anniversary is going to be used by our government and by other governments who are prepared to send people to war and send people to their deaths as a justification for war. It is absolutely right that people remember the dead of the First World War, the Second World War, and all the other wars that people have suffered in and people have been victims of. But let us not allow them to use the anniversary of the First World War as a justification for more wars, as a justification for more military spending, as a justification for all the things. And that's why we're very much involved in the No Glory campaign and in campaigning for a different interpretation of what happened in the First World War, and for an assessment which says we don't want any more wars. And wouldn't it be a great anniversary if we could mark 1914 next year by saying not that we're going to glorify war, but that we're going to cut the spending on war, cut the spending on the military, and let's spend it on things that people in this country and around the world really need. That would be really something worth fighting.